So, good afternoon. This is our fourth talk of six on the rescue, rethink, regenerate high streets and town centres. So, thank you very much for joining us. If you've joined us on a series ticket, thank you very much. And if you've joined us on an individual ticket as well, welcome. We are the Heritage Trust Network, and we are an organisation of 800 plus members across the UK that are working to restore and rescue heritage assets, buildings, structures, places, all of that kind of thing. So if you haven't heard of us before, please get in touch to find out a bit more about us and how you could possibly work with us as part of your organisation. A little bit of online etiquette. I apologise, I'm teaching you to suck eggs. I know we're very used to this after 3 years, but we just like to remind people that obviously there is a little bit of etiquette that's needed on these talks. So if you could please remain muted throughout the presentation with Chris this afternoon, that'd be great. However, he has got some bits throughout that he is going to let you all talk or type away in the chat box as well. So obviously just pay attention to that, because he will be asking you different things throughout. So you can't fall asleep this afternoon, I'm afraid, people. As always, please limit distractions around you. And as I say, if you have any comments or questions, please pop those in the chat box throughout the presentation so you don't forget. And we will be doing questions at the end with Chris, where we can answer them through the chat box, or we can unmute people as well. So don't forget those questions at the time, scribble them down or pop them into your chat box. And as always, we're happy if you turn your camera off. But we will probably do a picture at the end for funders, just to show how many people we've got in the room as well. So thank you if you would like to do that. As part of this series, we have toured the UK. We've been to Wales, we've been to Scotland, Northern Ireland and England for 5 events with over 200 delegates to continue this discussion on rethinking, reusing and regeneration of our town centres and high streets. We've had tours of buildings, we've had tours of heritage action zones or conservation areas and heritage action zones, all sorts of things that have gone on, as well as the buildings that we've been in. So if you've joined us for one of those, thank you very much. We've had some fantastic speakers as part of that, some great discussions and some very big inspirations as well. So if you've been on one of those with us, thank you very much for joining us. And as I say, we are on our fourth talk of the series. So I'm going to now introduce you to Chris. So Chris is a legend in this world of heritage and public realm works, everything like that. I've put the wrong one on there. We'll skip past that one quickly because that was last week's. But yes, he's a bit of a legend on the Future High Streets Task Force. He's involved in the Institute of Place Management, who, if you came to the Manchester event, we had Steve Millington, fascinating organisation. And he's been all around the UK doing different bits, and yeah, very much bringing the high streets back to life and being a very, very big advocate to it. So I'm now going to pass you over to Chris, who's going to share his screen. And I hope you enjoy this afternoon's talk with Chris, and we'll see you again at the end for some questions with our speaker. So Chris, are you ready to share your screen for us, please?
Hi, yes. Hopefully people can see that.
We can.
Just move that box over to one side. Okay, so rethinking town centres, part of the series. Interesting that the last talk was also around some related themes around partnerships. So those of you who were at that, it will be good to use today as part of the continuity. I'm talking about a range of things, but suggesting that whilst it's quite complicated, or seems quite complicated, the work that we want to do and the people that we need to bring together, are we really just talking about attracting more happy faces to places? And in all the complexity, if we can just stay focused on, are we achieving that? Then maybe that will help us all row in the same direction. So this is a town where I've been working. All of our social media feeds, I'm sure, and hopefully some of our weekend experiences are full of happy faces in places at the moment, as Christmas lights get switched on, trails get unveiled, and we pound the streets to look for Christmas presents for our loved ones. Why isn't It wasn't moving on for a moment. So, of course, town centres aren't only for Christmas. This is me in Letchworth in the summer. I won't bother you with all the background that Hannah's run through, but just kindly safely to say that I am networked in terms of understanding and love sharing what's going on in our town centres, and happy to be part of that, and happy to maintain the dialogue with people from today. I'm quite an avid user of LinkedIn, and I had a good conversation around today's event, which I'll follow on and share the feedback from some of you today. So we're talking about rethinking town centres, and we're talking about plans, policies, and particularly partnerships. And I want to build on what's been discussed previously to kind of pick your brains and share in terms of how can we make it really happen? How can we ensure that all the different elements that we need to bring together are brought together, and we deliver things that do attract people, more people, back to enjoy our town centres. Now, I'd like to just pause for maybe 5 minutes now. So just kind of, you can all learn a little bit about each other, and I can learn a little bit about you. So if using the chat function, if you're happy to just share your name, your organisation and your role, and then just add a tiny little bit about what is your interest in town centres. It can be professional, it can be personal. And then an extra point, which will become apparent why I'm interested in that, is if you could just share your favourite town centre business. It can be a specific business, a type of business, or an organisation that's in town centre as a service, or a particular product that you like to enjoy in town centres. So if we just pause for 5 minutes where you share that information and you share with each other a little bit of your perspectives on town centres. I'm hoping people are busy typing away. Great. So hello, Gillian and Marie. Animation. Manchester Northern Quarter. Local plan policies. Very pertinent. Hi, Lizzie. John. Hospitality, you enjoy, Sean? And I think hospitality is one of those things that our local town should serve us very well, because we want to socialise local. We want to be with people that we know, and it's easy to get to and from. Jenny in Aberdeen. Yep, I'm hearing lots of great things from Union Street, our Union Street, and the community getting behind that. Barbara in Tendring, two town centres. You're a high street accelerator. I spoke to the civil servants behind that. Historic England. Tiny little craft beer microbrewery in Biggleswade. I'm not that far from Biggleswade, so I might look out for that. That's something, it's a nice addition, isn't it, to our town centres? I was working away in Malvern, and I met up with some old friends in a little microbrewery and pub there, and it was, I don't know, it was kind of, yeah, just a little bit different, a little bit friendly and quirky compared to a normal pub. Diane from Rushmore. Itchy Bits Boutique, vintage fashion. And it's, yeah, it's businesses like that that offers something different and possibly get you coming into your local town. Probably prompted by that single business, but then enjoying other things. Socializing again from Malcolm. And Jennifer from Haverfordwest. I agree that you have a beautiful old town. And there has been a process of renovation going on in Haverfordwest for a number of years, hasn't there? And Beverly likes one more bike in Horncastle. A reused bank, good to see. And yeah, that combination of cafe and repair shops, I think it's a great addition. And it gives you an achievable destination. I've got a town about 15 miles away from me, and the idea of cycling there to the market, a piece of cake, somewhere I can lock my bike up safely and then return is a nice day out. Holly from Letchworth, so you'll be hearing lots of things you're very familiar with, and hopefully you can add details to that. Jane from Portsmouth, kind of shop local, independence, pop-ups. Yeah, pop-ups add variety. Mark from Heritage Trust. 9-acre site, grade 2 listed building. Northern Ireland, and I'm going to touch a little bit on Living High Street, which I think is a great example of a holistic approach to reimagining town centres. Small independent and creative businesses. Ellie, so many of these coming in, it's hard keeping up with you all. Strengthening Portobello Market. Yeah, markets add a lot. Ian, who I know from his days at Cambridge Bid, and he's going for a brewery, seafood tapas in Falmouth, and he wouldn't enjoy going there. Zoe, local independent department store and bookshop. Those are two endangered species, so you're lucky to be able to use both of those. James from Portsmouth. Waterstones, despite having a Kindle. Yeah, there's something to be said for well, towns versus online in general, I think. The Angel and the Royal in Market Deeping. Is that a pub? Joanne from Eastleigh, creative independence and cultural businesses. So we're all talking about the variety, aren't we? And we're talking about the special things that our towns have that you can't get online, you can't get in a shopping centre. Honour independent restaurants, a lot of people talking about hospitality. David. Leeds and Banbury, those two contrasting places, mixing culture and hospitality. And then Martin, Gateway Studios in Gateshead, and you have a role in definitely animating your town centres. So that's great. That's been a helpful introduction to me. We'll scroll on. We can scroll on, and I could hit the whole presentation reading those. But you can look at that and share, and we can capture that at the end. But that's been very helpful to kind of just get a flavour of who I'm speaking to, and really your professional and personal passions for town centres, which is great to see coming through. I'm going to talk now a little bit about all the different things that we need to think about when we're trying to attract people to our town centres. And I'm going to talk about those in terms of what I call the what and the how of town centre revitalisation, of rethinking town centres. The orange are the things, the what. the issues, the things we want to change, the projects, things that we want to improve. The how are we going to do that? We can do those things, but unless we have strategy plans, objectives, organizations, engagement, then some of that what isn't going to happen. And I'm going to touch on some of the what today, but I really want to focus on the how that makes a difference. And we have a way of talking about both at People and Places. We've organized those different aspects into what we call the 6S. And the central one, the larger one, is around function, which is all those what things. And it's important to understand that there are lots of aspects. So it's things around what I call the look of the place, parking, planning, streetscape, but it's also the feel of the place. And that's things like business diversification, marketing, place branding, events. And we need to look at all that. But what I'm going to linger a lot on today is how do we nurture and look after all those things? And that's what I'm going to elaborate on a little bit about. The foundations, how do we understand our places? Organizational things around form and folk and function, funding and forward planning, and working together in partnerships. So we organized all those things, and we actually wrote them up together as part of an online toolkit for the Local Government Association. Don't look at it now, but I've tried to provide QR codes for all the resources, and there'll be a video version of this presentation as well as a PDF, so that don't worry that you need to scribble things down now. You'll be able to look at your will using QR codes at least for all the resources. But this is available online, and it works through that process of looking at the how and the what, and those 6 F's. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about recipes, but that's the recipe that we use at People and Places when we're working with local authorities and communities and businesses to plan for the revitalisation of town centres. I'm now going to talk a little bit more about the what and give you some examples. And I'm going to talk about that as it's akin to assembling the ingredients. Now, these are all ingredients that relate to one of my favourite businesses in the town centre and one of my favourite products. And I find myself, and I visit towns all over the country, as Hannah said, is I can't keep away from butchers. And there's something about you going to a butcher's in a town, you look at the butchers, you look at what's on sale, and you somehow get an indication of what that place is like. So I went to Marlborough in Wiltshire, and they don't have butchers there. They have purveyors of quality meats. I went to work in Colwyn Bay in North Wales, and I came out with 3 Welsh lamb's hearts and a recipe for stuffing them, something I've never thought of using before, and certainly my children never thought of eating before. But it turned out to be a palatable meal if suitably stuffed. So yeah, this is a product that I often find picking up when I'm in a town, just as a way really of, well, having lunch, but also getting a sense of a place. So, but I want to just really kind of say, this is about the ingredients, assembling the ingredients. And I'm going to give you a sense of what some of those ingredients may be. And in the back of your head, thinking about, well, it's all well and good doing these things, but is it helping us with our single, simple objective of more happy faces and places? And I'm just saying that as a way of, if you're meeting and you're working with different groups within your town and they're coming up with fantastic project ideas. For example, I did some work with a town in Ireland. We spent lots of days doing research, building capacity, and they came up with an event, fantastic event, but 3 miles out of town in a woodland. And my question was, how's that bringing happy faces to your town centre? It's creating happiness, but aren't we about town centres really? So kind of just as a way, as a check back. Now these projects or these solutions that I run through will deliver lots of other things, But I'm just suggesting the commonality might be, is it achieving this simple, straightforward objective as a sort of check back? So town centres are complex. People mentioned planning, local planning. One of the aspects that we get brought into is neighbourhood planning, a great opportunity for communities getting involved and helping shape new housing allocations and other assets in their towns. But we found that some neighbourhood plans almost think, well, the town centre's done. We don't need to come up with new policies for that. But now, and we're getting involved in Buckingham, for example, where they're reviewing their neighbourhood plan, and we're helping them actually look at, well, what is the connection, what is the role, and how can we strengthen the policies and the understanding and the evidence about the town centre as part of what you're achieving. And of course, new housing and new allocations, it's important about what they are, where they go, because they do create new demand for businesses and services in our town centres. But it's also important to think about the new residents, the new homes, and how they link to existing homes, to think, how can we achieve an emotional and a physical connection between those new homes, possibly passing through existing homes, to the town centre, so that it's easier and more appealing to get into your local town, because I would suggest people are moving there because they want to be part of their local community, than to get on the ring road, which is often very near to the new homes, and travel somewhere else. And what are the sustainable ways that we can do that? A way that through active travel, through cycleways that existing residents can also benefit from. And what are the policies that we can help to strengthen the offer in the town centre, attract extra resources, and really strengthen its role as a hub for the whole community in terms of being central and for the new residents. Another example is we cannot go into a town anywhere in the country where businesses will not perceive that parking is the problem. So we've become kind of quite specialist, and we work with associates to kind of understand and say, well, is it really a problem? And we'll ask customers what they think. And then more and more, we look at the whole journey into town. So we will look at parking, and actually you can usually unpick it, and you usually find quick wins just by saying, well, who are your customers? What's the type of parking they need for their length of stay? Where do they need to park to meet their needs? And then looking at that whole journey that isn't just by car, it's about the choices, what I call from sofa to shop. So that starts with which town are you going to go to, why, how do you make it appealing, how do you make it easy? And I can just give an example of doing some work in Malvern in Worcestershire. We look at key attractions like the theatre there, restaurants, and very often businesses online will tell you how to get to their front door. They won't tell you that you can travel by train. They won't tell you the best parking for an evening at a theatre. So it's just kind of very basic things, but make that journey a lot easier. Embracing active travel, looking at blue badge provision with associates, all ways that really, if we're doing our job well in terms of parking provision, perceive it not as a barrier, but as a service that enables people to use their town. And if parking is working well, it's an invisible service that you really don't notice. So we do a lot of work with that. We do a lot of work supporting and working with associates, looking at varying the business mix within town centres and changing the types of businesses. And this is an area that's very close to my heart. It's looking at the role of community-owned enterprises, very often in restored iconic buildings, creating new attractors to the town centres whilst others are closing, and developing sustainable and community-owned assets and businesses. I mean, that's a win-win-win. And when we're talking about targeting public funds, because the benefits from that type of business are multiple compared to some other businesses, I'm glad to see organisations like Locality and Power for Change in their manifestos, or creating manifestos to ahead of the next election to shout about that opportunity. And part of what I try to do with my roles with the Institute of Place Management and the Association of Town Centre Managers is to kind of try and mainstream that also within the place management movement. And so I think that's, yeah, as I say, it's kind of a win-win-win, and providing extra reasons to get people into town centres. And then lastly, as an example, something that I'm looking more and more into is place branding, which is more than just marketing. It's about understanding the place, understanding issues and shortfalls, and understanding what's good about a place. And I can talk about this for a long time, but just to flag up a couple of things at the moment is new logos and bright designs on tote bags are fine, but place branding is about lots and lots more than that. It's about thinking about the past, the present, and the future of places. This is Lowestoft, where we've been doing some work. It's a fantastic place. It has a marvelous heritage, but it has its critics at the moment. When we did the resident perception survey, there were some choice words that people don't like to see being used to describe their town. But there's a lot of work been going on, but East Suffolk Council and other partners in the town have been very careful to update the narrative about the place at the same time. And so it's fantastic when you pick up or you see online a copy of the Daily Telegraph travel section several years on that says, "Move over the South Wold. The new place on the East Coast to visit is Lowestoft." And part of that is because that narrative is very authentic, and authenticity is very in fashion in terms of experiences for people traveling. But what my angle on place branding and identity is, start with your residents. They are part of your brand. They are part of the quality that people enjoy in a place. They are your first target audience for encouraging to use their place more often, and they are the ambassadors for your brand. So when you hop in a taxi in Lowestoft or wherever, you want the taxi driver to be telling you what a great place it is, not as I went into a barber's in a Lincolnshire town without saying what my role was, just having 15 minutes of, the town's not what it used to be. And I'm like, well, thank you, but that's not what I'm interested to learn, really. It's got other assets and it's got other facets. It's a town where a lot was going on, but clearly this barber wasn't aware of all the things that was going on, and wasn't adjusting her perception of the identity and the image of the place as a result. So that's just picking up very, very quickly on some of the things you can do to change places. And I could talk lots more about examples of that and how to go about that. But I want to move on now, and still asking that question, with all that work, are we achieving our simple ambition? Are we getting more happy faces in our town centres? Well, a lot of those things are about getting people into town. They are about making towns more appealing, about improving the narrative, making it easier to get into reasons to go into town. And yet I would say on their own, they're not getting many people up from their sofa. Because what we need to look at in the second part of making a pork pie is, I wouldn't have a clue. You can give me those ingredients, but unless you give them the recipe, and possibly even with the recipe, pick out every half an hour, which is a good prompt time-wise. So the how, really, I'm using the metaphor, that's about the recipes. How do we bring those ingredients together so that we are really making a difference? It's fantastic to have strategies and plans, well, arguably, but unless you're really putting the effort of getting everybody rowing in the same direction and working together, they're no more than plans and strategies. Or some things will happen in a piecemeal way, but we're not really making the most of the opportunity. So I want to focus on the recipes, really. The first part of our recipe, and again, I could talk an hour and a half just about this. It's normally a piece of work that takes us 3 or 4 months to do, but we spend a lot of time going in and understanding a place. And there's various metrics we use, but the most informative thing is we'll go into every local business and we'll stop people on the street or do surveys online to understand local stakeholders' perceptions of a place, what are their priorities, and what are the issues that they face, so that we can help to craft a plan that addresses what local people feel important. And sometimes that's just perceptions, and you can share information, you can tell stories, and you can overcome those perceptions. In some cases, it might seem a relatively minor issue, and a typical example of that is on-street car parking. People get so vexed about that because of all sorts of experiences, and until you can talk through that and change that, maybe they won't be ready to talk about bigger issues, or if you address bigger issues, they won't pay attention to it because they're still fixed on they got a parking fine outside the hairdresser's 2 years ago and didn't think it was just. So we spend a lot of time and we ask people their perceptions as well. And this is, we ask people to sum up their place in one word. And it's spookingly accurate, really, in terms of these word clouds. This is 4 neighbouring towns in North Hertfordshire where we've been working. And I won't name the towns, but if I got somebody local to these towns to look at these word clouds, they could pretty much tell me, I think, which of the 4 towns each word cloud. So you've got welcoming, vibrant, good, charismatic, attractive. Those are words we want to hear. Less of the declining, boring, lacking, dull, as the may, and local politicians may deny that that's what their town is. But if overwhelmingly the voice of local users of the town is using that, then at least we need to listen to that perception. So we do loads of work around that, and this relates to partly this another work relates to what the government have in terms of the concept of pride and place, which I'll say a little bit more. But we start that and we find out and speak to other organizations and do desktop review to find all the things that are going on in place. And this starts to be where we can start to build partnerships around saying, this is our view, listening to other people. It's not our view, it's stakeholders' view. It's our metrics compared to working in other towns. And we start to using that framework for the 6 Fs to then categorize things and say, which are the things that you all already got in hand, or which are the issues that people feel strongly about, but you're not addressing at the moment. And then we methodically work through that, but we need to work through that in partnerships to come up with proposals and ways of communicating, engaging people, and measures of outcomes, so that we can go back, hopefully do this type of work in, say, 2-3 years' time, and we can demonstrate that that people are feeling better about their place. And I'm about to go back a decade after we first started working in a town in the middle of Ireland. We went back there after 2 years where we did preliminary work. They did a lot of capacity building, a lot of networking. They developed some tremendous events like a Christmas festival. But physically on the ground, nothing had changed after 2 years, really. It was just that people felt a lot better and there were activities going on. But when we did that survey 2 years on, both businesses and customers universally all felt a lot more positive and had a greater pride of place in their town. And we're going back up to 10 years where there's been lots of physical change, new businesses, and it'll be interesting to see. But that's been a 10-year project that started on building that confidence and that capacity. I want to reflect a little bit more and then get your reaction to this, in that I do some work with the High Street Task Force. They visited I think over 200 towns where work's ongoing. And the striking thing, but it's not a surprise to me, is that their research and reporting shows that in 6 out of 10 places, the plans that do exist are being held back by either a lack of networks or partnerships, or poor quality of networks and partnerships. So all those things that we can do to get people using our towns, they're certainly not having the impact that they should be having, because we're not putting the effort into working well together. So I just kind of want to explore that. And if I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my insights and experiences, and then I'll open up the discussions. Maybe we'll carry on doing that as a chat function, because that worked well, to kind of say, what are your experiences from being involved in partnerships, whether that's heritage partnerships, whether that's town partnerships, or it may be another voluntary organization or committee that you're involved in, from either a professional or personal point of view. Which are the ones that have worked well, and which are the ones that have frustrated you? And what are the things that you think, actually, if we just did that a bit better? And as somebody said on an exchange on LinkedIn today, it's not rocket science, but it's just paying attention to that, making those things work, so that we are giving ourselves a chance to improve our places. So I'll reflect a little bit and then kind of open it up to the floor for a bit of a discussion. This is very simplistically how we tend to group issues around town centres, just to make sure that there's some coverage. But you can do that in different ways, and there may be, there may be a business-based group that already meets, and we need to fit into that structure, or there may be a particular festival or event, a project as well. But broadly, as I said early on, you can think about, you need to make sure you're covering off the strategic, the transportation, the things that shape the structure of a place, planning, travel, streetscape, which I use the shorthand of the look of the place. But you equally need to think about the feel of the place. And that's things about the business mix, it's about the marketing, what I was saying about branding, about new events and festivals, about what's the online portrayal of a place. And I'm amazed how I can be invited to meet people in a town centre to take a holistic view, and I'm only introduced to one or other of those two sides of the coin, even though I said in one place where I was high street work, so haven't you got people responsible for markets, animation? I said, oh yeah, but we didn't think it was relevant to involve them. So it's kind of, it seems obvious, but it's obviously not obvious. So those are important. But what I really want to flag up is, whether you call it a core group or core skills, but working away and giving much more value to that coordination role, because there are many things going on, and we need to get them working together. But especially the communication role, about bringing people with you on this whole journey about what the issues are, sharing the data so that you're not just presenting people with a fait accompli. You're saying, well, this is the things we found about your town. What do you make of it? How do you understand it? With your local knowledge, can you interpret it? And then people become part of developing the solutions. And the other role is monitoring. The start of my career, outcomes monitoring and outputs was like, oh, it's just kind of rhetoric. But now I can't envisage doing anything without focusing on what you're wanting to achieve and measuring it. And not just measuring it. Used to get brought in to do evaluation work 5 years at the end of a 5-year scheme, and it was like, there's no point in evaluating it now. It's happened, really. It should have been ongoing throughout, so that the issues that we're spotting were corrected. So that core group, I feel, is a key to the success of making our places work, and making them more appealing. And I kind of just give a couple of examples. So here's an example. Been doing some work in Northern Ireland, looking at, which is great to be asked to do, to look at not the what, but the how a local authority is relating to its communities and its towns. And I just flag this up really is because a lot of people talk about the tensions with between what they describe as a top-down approach or a community-led bottom-up approach. And you'll get some people who will advocate very strongly for one or the other. I just say, really, I think we need to be realistic that both do have a place. And what we need to look at is the bringing together and the meeting of the top-down. A local authority or a national government will have its objectives that it's trying to deliver through places, and we need to understand that. Equally, a local community or initiatives that facilitate the engagement of local community will have their ways and thoughts and processes, and we need to look at bringing together of those. And I just highlight from new guidance released in Northern Ireland. It's called the Living High Streets Craft Kit. Just to say that's an updated take on how you need to pull communities together to look at multifaceted use of their town centres. They call that bringing together of partnerships, a local action group. But I just want to highlight two elements of that. One is that they have the sequence, which, if you're used to kind of working in a structured kind of plan-based way, is, you know, that cycle of you look at the people, you look at the place, you fuse that together, come out with some new ideas, deliver, monitor, maintain. That cycle of constant learning and improvement. But that needs to be backed by how does this local action group and how does the engagement function. And they just suggested, and I've not seen it before quite presented this way, using the Iraqi format of saying, how do you define that different stakeholders have slightly different roles? And they define that as responsible, the lead role, accountable, which I found very interesting how they use this as people that have to take some degree of ultimate responsibility for what the group's doing. But they may just give their permission, keep an eye on it, but let others get involved and have leading roles. And the example that is used here is the role of elected members. And I thought that was quite interesting because elected members have a special role to play, but sometimes it's quite a complicated role to see how they fit in. Because you want them to value, you want them to contribute to the process, but you don't want to be organising a small partnership group meeting and 6 ward councillors come up from different parties representing different areas of the town and dominate the conversation. So I just thought that was an interesting reflection on, is that a possible way of thinking about that particular group? And then I was interested in what they said about the informed. So recognizing that not everybody needs to be fully involved in a hands-on way all the time. And there are some groups, as well as kind of wider individuals, that need to be aware of what's going on, kept up to date, and almost so that alarm bells will ring when there are opportunities or actions that impact on the role of their organisation. And an example would be a local residents association that's adjacent to a town centre, but what happens in the town centre isn't core to what they exist to do, but some things like organising an event or just animating the town centre impact on the lives of their residents. So I just kind of thought, oh, that's an interesting different way of thinking. And then the other example I want to just focus on is town deal boards have been established and as a result of government funding. that's been passed down to communities. They had to be set up in a particular way that met the requirements of the funding. And I know a few of my high street visits, we've been looking at, well, how does that board need to think about evolving going forward? And possibly in ways that it should have been thinking from the beginning. So does it have a long-term role beyond delivering very demanding funding programs that looks at all things, that's inclusive of people that were perhaps not invited to the table to the beginning, and is kind of long-term visionary role for the whole town centre, not just the capital projects. And how does it balance that long-term need with immediate placemaking needs, accepting that it may no longer have the same level of resources straight away that it's been working to in the past. Those softer sides, the animating town centres, bringing the town to life. Sometimes there wasn't room for those when you've got to deliver a very demanding capital programme, but how do they need to be part of the organisation going forward? Coordination and communication, as I said, I feel it's core and needs to be worked at. And so needs to be a key part of what the board is going forward, and have the resources and people focused on that. And how do we get this blend from those bigger organizations, which may be, for example, a local university, local authority, chamber of commerce, large businesses, working alongside smaller organizations that may have interest in a more limited geography or a limited theme, that may only have one or two people working for them. How can they be brought to the table, because they may have been excluded, and ensure that they have an equal say, an equal voice, and have something to contribute? So those are just some thoughts. I'll try and do this as a chat function, but we're just really inviting your experiences, really. I've put my starter for 10 in terms of some of the things we need to think about, but prompted with what I've been saying already, just think about those groups that you go to, those ones that you really look forward to going to because they're dynamic, you know things are going to be achieved, you know people are working together, people aren't looking after their vested interests. And those of you that are lucky enough to go to those groups, share your experiences. I suspect there may be some of you who go to the other type of group where you think, why am I here? I've lost confidence in that it's achieving things. But if you could present to that group and say, if we can just tweak these things, this group may be more effective. So I'll stop talking a little bit. I will do some prompts over the next 10 minutes or so to explain a little bit more about these 10 points I've put down, but I'm just going to pause a minute. I'm going to have a drink of water and just give you time to reflect on what works for you and what hasn't worked for you, and what's good practice in terms of running a partnership, whether it's a heritage trust, whether it's a town centre partnership, or whether it's something else that you have experience of in your professional personal life. one of the things I think it's difficult to determine is who should be around the table in a partnership and why. So kind of my point 7 is, why are you inviting people to be part of the partnership, and on what basis? And I've suggested you recruit people for their knowledge, because they have something to bring in that way, and their talent or their capacity to do things. But I think there's also an element of their mandate in terms of, are they representing a particular sector, a particular place in the town? But there are complications around that, because you may be somebody who has ideas to set up a particular event, and at the moment you're trying to build support for that. How do you invite them? Somebody today was asking me about what's the role under that Northern Irish RACI framework for local businesses, and my point of view was, it's much easier if you're getting people that are representing their peers, and so this is one of the things that we need to look at is, well, if you're a business, are you in some way organized? It may be just a section of the town, but you're taking the time to communicate with your peers to ensure that it's not just your views, it's the views of the people that run businesses in that particular section of the town. Do we need to have some sort of quality control around that representation? And just looking at some of the thoughts coming in. Thanks, everyone. And Ian, from his experience at the bid, is saying, meeting the key players, they will be businesses for you, Ian, from your point of view, from working with businesses. And it's good to have that business perspective. I would say it's good to have the customer and the community perspective. We do lots of, as I say, we kind of triangulate between our metrics, what communities and users think of the place, and what businesses think of the place. And the interesting thing is that those community members are very often the business's customers, but they have very different perception of the place. How do we get that? Sean, you're talking about placemaking plans for each town centre, which I think is very encouraging to hear that, and that you're taking the lead in trying to do that based on data, fantastic, and followed up with engagement. So I think that's, in terms of the foundation, for me, is fundamental. And once you start those relationships, it's continuing them. You don't just gather information from people and then use it, but don't tell them how you're using it. So it's kind of an ongoing journey. Hannah, from your experiences of a tourism group, bringing together attractions, events. I think people that have a stake, particularly in Peterborough's tourism offer. Okay, and then trying to combine the data and understanding. That'd be great. And to seeing if they're talking about similar markets and customers, that would be very revealing. Joanne, is it how do you work with the select few that shout the loudest, specific details, and often missing the big picture? I think you have to try and that is that is really challenging. And I sat in an academic presentation about work in Bath and Bristol, where the researcher, this was last Tuesday night, the researcher said, unwittingly, I suspect wittingly also, people were using what she described as their social capital and cultural capital, their sort of status, to block other people out. I think what I try to do is kind of work with that evidence and understanding, and I'm not going in and saying I know everything about the town, but genuinely reflecting back the evidence and understanding. And the most refreshing thing will be, and it can be like the leader of a local authority that's happened to me twice, and said, when you first got involved, Chris, I thought this was going to be a waste of time, to be honest. But now I've thought it through and I've listened and I've been part of that listening. I can kind of see it's really useful. You will always get at some meetings who I generally refer to as the Colonel Blimp figure, who just wants to make his voice heard, not really in contributing in a positive way. And I think you have to be kind of respectful, but sort of expect that the rest of the room is feeling like you. That they're used to this person showboating. But it is challenging, and I think we have to also think about how and the ways we're engaging people. So we need to think about meetings in villages halls as not being the only way of communicating people and getting views. Yes, social media. It has a snowball effect, doesn't it? And I was working in a town, Selby in North Yorkshire, and somebody set up a Facebook page called SOS Selby. So just the name is inviting everybody, save our souls, to be negative. Equally, I worked in Whitley Bay in North Tyneside, where a volunteer working for a Chamber of Commerce was absolutely fantastic at that curating positive news, and in a nice way shutting down or not setting up this culture of negative comments. And that's an example of a really useful resource. I'm just looking at Azra. Hi, Azra. Right, just to scroll down. Yeah, I think I'm going to talk about the Shared Prosperity Fund, SPF. It's a fantastic opportunity to or it could be more of a fantastic opportunity to build capacity, to build plans, and I think there's something in there, what you're saying, Azra, about places having the confidence, and I'm going to reflect on that a little bit when we talk about government and local authority support, to say this is a long-term game. Resources will come and go, but you've got to be tenacious, build a plan, build capacity, and work through that and be ready to take opportunities. David, you're right. Certainly initially, it's easier to engage stakeholders, and I think particularly businesses, people that are action orientated, in short-term things, because they're looking, short-term survival, being around. And it's also good for confidence of the wider community and stakeholders to deliver things in the short term, like the Irish examples. They may not be massive changes, but just people. The Irish example was one of their members went away to somewhere like Belgrade and saw a huge wooden Christmas tree that people could walk in, and came back to this small town in Ireland and said, showed them pictures and said, could we make one of those? And local craftspeople, it cost them €5,000 to make it, but the kind of sentiment in the town was that never happens here. Things like that never happen here. It was kind of a real symbol. And they backed that by online social media about Christmas window dressing competition. It just suddenly, people with that sort of sense, and then that's the kind of first sign of a boost in pride of places. Things like that don't normally happen here. So you're right. And some people are very action orientated. And I was an observer on a town group recently, and I sat in on it for 2 hours. And they said, "What did you think?" And I said, "Well, honestly, I wouldn't come again because it was just dull. The whole format of the meeting. It was in a local authority meeting room. It was during the day, with just people offloading and sharing information, all things that could be done in other ways, and it wasn't action orientated at all. So different people. And I said to one of the members, why don't you meet anywhere else or talk about other things? Or I said, you could meet in a pub, for example, or have informal groups. And her eyes lit up at the thought of the meeting actually being enjoyable, which you need to think about, particularly if people are giving up. Together we make Eastleigh, Joanne. It'd be interesting to know more about that and how you're creating that sense of togetherness. Getting the local
media. Be more than happy to talk to you.
Well, yeah, it'd be good to have that conversation. Maybe we'll pick that up at the end, Joanne. Beverly, you raised the issue about the local media. It is interesting, or it is easier for them to pick up on negative stories. I think it's trying to work away with the editorial team and show them the story that you're on. I've been tracking Bradford, which is going to be UK City of Culture in 2025, which is absolutely right for negative stories about wasting public money, this, that, and the other. But actually, they seem to have done some work with the Telegraph and Argus, which is the local paper there, because the stories are positive, they're well informed, they've obviously been briefed, and they're behind the campaign. Whereas, it'd be much more typical at this stage before it's happened for local media to be against. So let me just, I'm sorry, the scrolling is challenging me. I'll just pick up on the last. Diane, project with local schools. Obviously, it's good to work with a variety of groups and to get local children on board as part of that, and kind of bring the families along. And you do that for the coronation. And as part of that, going in and working with them on the designs, you can maybe then have conversations with children and their parents, kind of like mini focus groups, just kind of saying, what do they think about the town? What are the perceptions? Kind of likes and dislikes. So I think we'll be able to download that. But I thought that's been really helpful, I think, in terms of just getting a sense. I'll just run through very quickly these kind of 10 thoughts I've got, and by all means react to them as I kind of go through them, and add other ideas. but whether it's the first thing or it needs to come out of it, there's that sense of a vision. And I used to be kind of a bit cynical about visions and things, but it's just a simple way that binds everybody together again. And it could be about more happy faces in your town centre, or something much more specific, but that you can keep referring back, and also that focus on the how, and that how is about the culture and values of you all work together, and that's down to listening to people and being respectful. The Irish toolkit, the Northern Irish toolkit, has this rather Harry Potter-esque, I don't know if they actually use them, but a series of coloured hats. And the idea is that when people want to brainstorm and share ideas, they figuratively, I suppose, put on a particular colour hat that says, listen to me, don't shoot me down. But which I find a little bit folksy, to be honest. I may struggle with that, but the idea, I've been in other groups where figuratively or otherwise people have the talking stick that they pass around the room, and the idea is when you're holding the stick, people should give you time and listen with an open mind to what you've got to say. So those are very specific examples, but it's not just the vision of what we're going to do, it's that collective sense of the values. I won't go on about it, but communications and communicators need to be in there from the beginning. And part of that communication and that engagement is understanding people's perceptions, listening to them, responding to them, and building relationships. I feel things work best if they're coordinated and just written down. Very often in a town, there are so many things going on that people don't realize. And once you just write down what's already going on, and communicate that, you still there's loads already happening. And I like to be outcomes focused. Number 4, about give and get. This is kind of my personal way. If I get invited to be involved on something, I think, what can I give? What can I bring to the table? And then in some way, what can I get out of it? And that get out of it can be all sorts of things. It can be just learning. It can be that sense of satisfaction. It can be that this meeting to run efficiently and I'm not frustrated, but kind of have a little bit of an open conversation about what people are bringing and what are their expectations about the way things will work or what they get out of it. And then, although I've talked about coordination and get everybody rowing in the same direction, you need to leave some room for mavericks, or what I call empowering people to play to their passions. So if someone comes along to your partnership and says, I want to launch a new jazz festival by the river, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's work through that. Let's see. Let's work through, you were thinking of bringing outside caterers. Well, how about let's talk to local businesses first and kind of nurture that, so that they're coordinated the right day of the week, speaking to the parking managers or whatever, but then you're freeing them up to go and work at that, to use their passions. Balancing quick wins and long-term strategy. I think we talked a little bit about that, but I think you have to have both. But certainly giving early attention to quick wins, but give people a sense of where you're going. Good. I talked about how you recruit people. Need to think about through that. Keep celebrating your successes, communicating that. Build capacity. I talked about in one example of people come to the table from smaller organizations, or they might represent youth groups, and it's kind of work with them to build their capacity and confidence, or go speak to them in venues and locations on their terms, but that they feel they've got the confidence to have their voice heard and will be listened to, and they recognize things that they've said coming back as part of the actions. And then the last one is this balance between putting down roots so that the organization's here to stay, and I feel this is what I was saying about the transition of the town deal boards. It's like, well, look for the organisation to live on, because activity can then focus around that organisation, whilst having a balance that you don't want your raison d'etre to be the survival of that organisation. But I think there is something to say. We know this is a long-term issue, and there will be highs and lows, but we're here with tenacity and with a plan to follow it through. So by all means, react and chat away. I'm just going to spend the last little bit of time looking at some of the particularly national policy things and how are they helping us. So we've looked at the ingredients, we've looked at the recipe. Are we getting nearer to smiling faces in places? And does that notion of smiling faces in places just help us row in the same direction? Well, this is my slightly cynical perspective on levelling up. And particularly with the shared prosperity, which I had huge hopes for and spent quite a lot of time understanding and sharing the information. And it hasn't lived up. It's not living up to my expectations across the country. It is in some places, but it's a very mixed picture. And I kind of just want to share some thoughts on why that is. I'd be very interested to hear your experiences, either as promoters of shared prosperity, and we have heard it referenced by ASRA as an opportunity, which is fantastic, and how things could be done better. The last 5 years has been very substantial in terms of the funding available to support towns since 2018 in all sorts of ways. I won't go through all of these, but the latest was levelling up round 3 announcements last week, very substantive chunks of money, and the High Street Task Force there. Great to have the academic rigour and the learning. So we should be expecting great things from all these resources. Looking particularly at the smaller scale funding and the revenue funding, my perspective is, if we knew in 2020 that there was going to be funding for 5 years, roughly supporting the same things, whether you call it Reopening High Streets, Welcome Back, or Shared Prosperity Fund, then everybody would have had much more confidence to build partnerships, build confidence, build plans, and not have a frantic spend it or lose it approach to funding. But instead, we've had this stop-start, launch, relaunch, and then Shared Forestry Funds launch, stop, and launch again, at a time when local authorities, I think, are under-resourced and struggle to make full use of this money that's been thrown at them at short notice, really. And so there are things going on, and I think hats off to those local authorities, those partnerships that say, well, we're going to develop our plan, we're going to build our capacity, and we're going to make use of this money in the way what we want to as it comes along. But the last 5 years haven't facilitated that. And this is my guidance, whether it's shared prosperity or the next opportunity that comes along, is kind of 5 principles. Agree how important your town and city centres are amongst the other things that you want to do within your communities. Build a plan around evidence base. Focus on the how as much as the what, so the partnerships as much as the projects, and build that capacity in the confidence that you will be able to deliver in long term. Because I think throwing money at projects or supporting businesses in a short-term way without a strategic element, to my mind, does little else than get rid of the money. You don't know about the impact. and arguably in some instances, it would almost be better to give the money back than to waste it. In other places, there are great things going on, but it's a very, very uneven playing field around the country for all sorts of reasons that it'd be interesting to explore more. And my way of thinking is to be very disciplined, understand the issues, link the interventions to those issues, and measure the impacts. Just be very disciplined, but don't, in the rush that sometimes funders and government is the worst of those, give you 6 weeks to develop a plan. Miss those stages out. We're working in a local authority where the economic development officer, he's a bit of a wheeler dealer, but he knew what was right for his communities and said, no, I'm going to help my communities manage the fund in the way that was helped with them, and it's my job to do the battle with government and bend their use of the funds to what's needed, not the other way around. This is an example of Letchworth, just on a page really, but just to show that discipline really. And there's a lot more work beyond this, but that between understanding the issue, existing strategy, indications of what needs to improve, people's perceptions, what can be done, quick wins, long-term strategy, and the outcomes. And it's that same discipline as that cycle that we show for Northern Ireland. And the colour coding is just giving us a sense of the prioritisation. And just to finish off, I want to just say a little bit about building pride and place. That got lots of mention early on in terms of government ethos and support. It doesn't get so much mention anymore, but I think it was quite clever, really. It was clever because pride and place, if you make people feel better about a place, it doesn't cost you kind of as much as large physical change. It's also electorally very clever, because if you can make people feel better about a place and associate it with you, then they're going to vote for you. But it was also in tune about the way people perceive places, and this is just some research quoted by the government. But just to say, those issues around the variety of your local shops, empty shops, local businesses, travel into town, the hospitality offer, local places to eat and drink, those things that we value are also a big part of what make people feel proud about their place, and they're also some sort of symbolic proxy for how people feel about their place. So so there's a nice tie in there, really, in some of this feedback loop between the pride and place, addressing these initial perceptions, and then reinforcing the pride and place. So I thought it was a good thing to work up and work on, but it seems to be given less and less profile. I think you need to think as organisations and partnership whether you value that. As I say, we've always asked people about their perceptions and tried to monitor the changing perceptions, because that's part of understanding, but perception initially is the reality as well. Building blocks for more effective town centre support. If there was an election coming up and I had the ear of government or future governments, this is what I'd say to them. That long-term commitment and consistency, local accountability and knowledge, evidence-led, spend the time to nurture capacity, make sure there is some ring-fence money for town centres, and support partnership projects. That would be what I was looking for. And very interesting to see recent announcements, not very imaginatively titled Long-Term Plan for Towns, but it does capture some of those things that I think are good practice. 55 communities, without asking for it, have been offered £20 million each. It's an odd way of working, but let's accept that. But the interesting thing is it's a 10-year endowment style of fund, which I interpret as they've got the money and they can spend it in the time frames that they feel are important, rather than always have this ticking clock. Overseen by a multi-stakeholder town board. Well, it'll be interesting to see how inclusive that is. Based on principles of partnership working, supported by the High Street Task Force of Equivalent coming in. It will be flexible, it will be place-based, and it promises to deliver local people's priorities, although it does headline some of what those priorities may be: reviving high streets, improving transport, dealing with antisocial behaviour, for example. But for whatever reason, it's nice to see that there's been some learning in there in terms of the piecemeal approach and the slightly rushed approach. And just to conclude, this photo is taken from the end of a face-to-face workshop that I attended, where we were all presented with pork pies and bottles of beer to network over at the end. So I'm sorry we're not offering that today. But to go back to our original question is, have we achieved our ambition, or can we achieve our ambition of more happy faces in town centres? Well, in theory, I think we can. We know how to put together the ingredients of a deliverable plan. It's been done before. We're good at sharing what works. We just need to have the discipline to work through it and be evidence-based. We understand the recipes for working together. There are great examples, some of you have touched on, all over the country, and there are ways to share that. So we know how to do it, and we realise what government can do to support us, but we can't be dependent on it. It will come in ebbs and flows. Some communities will get more resources than others, but we're talking about changes where we need tenacity, we need a long-term plan, and some of what you can do can come within. So in summary, our simple ambition is achievable. I will, though, just admit that achieving it isn't quite so simple. It's complicated, but it's not rocket science. It's about working together, and it's about using good practice that's widely available across the country, and it's about coordination, it's about communication, and it's about tenacity.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. That was absolutely brilliant. Hopefully that's given a lot of people some thought-provoking questions, questioned what they're doing, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm conscious that Chris has to go at past. So we have got 5 minutes. So is there anybody who'd like to unmute themselves quickly to ask Chris any questions? There are obviously quite a few notes in the chat, but not any actual questions sort of thing. So I thought if I just asked the questions first, is there anybody who's got something that would really, really like to ask Chris? Mark, you've unmuted yourself. Would you like to ask Chris something?
Yes, I'd like to. I'd like to ask Chris. We've got a bit of a challenge with such as the town deal boards, and we just don't seem to be able to get in there to be able to access funding. And you probably won't appreciate me saying this, but the local authority seem to prioritise their own heritage assets before others in the area. So we find that the money's just kind of allocated, and there's no way of kind of getting our snout in the trough, so to speak. Any thoughts?
Well, and it comes back to what I was giving a quick overview about, the need for those to evolve and to be more inclusive. I think the problem is that local authorities are invited to submit bids in a rush, and maybe the shortcut was, I'm being generous, was to look at their own assets that they could quickly submit. and maybe there was elements of backfilling shortages in their own budgets. But the challenge for you is that a lot of that was decided at the beginning of the programs, and then they had very demanding schedules just to deliver that. What I would be asking about, and it doesn't get you the current cash, is how that board's evolving and how's it going to be more inclusive. They were also had a hand tied behind their back in that government dictated to them about who should be round the table. So I think the hope is trying to look to the future if your board's evolving to make the case that now they've got the flexibility for you to round the table and that you've got things to offer.
Okay, thank you. That's Chris.
Fabulous. Thank you for that question, Mark. Is there anybody else that would like to ask Chris a question? Beautiful. 3 minutes to spare as well, Chris, so that you can totter off and get the little one from nursery. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. If there is any other questions, please feel free to message either myself or Bev. We'll be happy to kind of forward those questions to Chris. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. And if there's obviously any introductions that you want us to make as well, we're more than happy to do that. That's part of what we do as the network. So please feel free to do that. Before